Okay, so we're up to the end of Siman Pei Zayin. The objective tonight is to, first of all, I'm sorry, the learning should be L'Zecha Nishmas. What was the name again? Shane Lobas? Chaim? Chaim Yehuda Leib. Shamash only Elias. And the family should have a Nechama. The only one who could be Menachem is HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So we're up to, I want to finish the end of Siman Pei Zayin, just to finish it up. It's one sheet on this. It's very interesting. It's very sadistic. And then we'll do a quick review of the last four seifim. I happen to have the tests. I'll hand them out. Not doing the test now. Take them on your own. And for those that are not here, I'm going to post it to the chat. Okay. So the last thing we learned last time was we talked about how to make cheese. So be'ikr, what we spoke about last time was two different methods. One was we talked about if there's milk that's curdled in the rennet. The rennet is the stomach, the keva. There's an enzyme on the stomach lining that is able to make cheese. Now, we spoke last time, if there's milk that's sitting there, what's the status of the milk? Because you want to turn it into cheese. If the milk is, so we said that if it's liquid, then according to the Rama, it's milk. If it's karush, if it's curdled, then it's pariv, perpetually pariv. Okay, we talked about last time. Then we spoke about the stomach lining, and we mentioned that if you dry it out, you could use it as a canteen. Also not negaya. Here's the third discussion, and that's going to talk about today. How do you make cheese? So the way to make cheese, again, you could use that curdled stuff from last week, but let's not talk about that. Let's go old school. The simplest way to make cheese is you take the stomach lining of the animal, the basar, the stomach lining of the keva, and put it into milk, and it'll make cheese. That is the simplest way to make cheese. I don't mean simplest halachically, I mean just simplest in mitzias. The question is, are you allowed to do this? Basically, every time you're doing this, it's basar b'chalav. Every single time you do it, it's all Shulchan Aruch, you don't need cheese. Every single time you're doing this, it's basar b'chalav, basically. So the basic premise of the Mechaber is like this. If you do it, every single time you're taking basar, because you're actually taking stomach lining and putting it into milk, it's basar b'chalav. The question is now, b'diavad. How big of a problem am I in? So this is the aside of the Mechaber. I'll say it outside, and then we'll sort of see it inside. If it's a kosher animal, meaning you shech the cow, you take the stomach lining, that is basar, kosher basar, and you put it into milk, it will be okay as long as they're shishim. B'diavad. I'm not saying you should do this. I'm saying if you take that stomach lining, and it's 1 ounce, and you put it into 100 ounces of milk, it's going to be fine. Batal b'shishim. However, if that stomach lining is from a non-kosher animal. I don't mean a pig. I mean a cow that was not shechted properly, a nevela, and you put it into the milk, it's a problem, no matter the ratio. Now, why is that? That's what we're going to see inside. So again, the premise is you take the same stomach lining of a kosher animal, a kosher shechted cow, that's going to be batal b'shishim. A nevela is not batal afilu in 1,000. That's the premise. So let's see it inside. The Mechaber says, Im hemid gvina, if you make cheese, ba'or kevas kshera, by using a kosher stomach lining of a cow, so you take a kosher cow that was shechted properly, you take the stomach line, this is Sif Yud Aleph, and you place it into milk, the halacha is, yeshba tam basar asura. If there's a tam basar, if there's a flavor of basar, then it's a problem. V'imlav muteris. And if not, it's allowed. Now what this means, what the Mechaber is basically saying is shishim. I'll explain in a moment why the Mechaber uses this terminology, but for all intents and purposes, shishim. If there's 60 times the milk corresponding to the meat that made the cheese, you're fine. Aval hamaymid bar kevas nevela, but if instead of using kosher stomach lining, you're using stomach lining of a nevela, so it's the exact same stomach lining, but one came from a shechted cow, and one came from a cow that you shot in the head. It's a nevela. The halacha is utreifo, behemoth tmeya, or from a pig, whatever it is. Pigs don't have that, but whatever. A non-kosher animal that has that type of enzyme. Oyser b'chol shehu. It's a problem even in 1,000. Why? Says the Rama, mishum dedavar ha'aser ba'atzmo, because something that is aser, like a nevela, u'maymid. We spoke about this last time. How could it be batal b'shishim? Think about it. Batal b'shishim means that once there's 60 times, the isser is insignificant. It's unrecognizable. Over here, it's cheese because of it. So don't tell me that it's unrecognizable. This is Sif Yud Aleph. It's in the back, though. I don't know if you have the tour in the front. So it can't be unrecognizable. Meaning, normally things are batal b'shishim because when it's 60 times, it's unrecognizable. Over here, this stomach lining of the nevela turned it into cheese. It changed the molecular structure of it. It's not batal. something that's maimed, something that changes the structure is not batal even in 1,000. Now, why is it that by kosher stomach lining it is? So the answer is very simple, and this goes back to the first thing we learned in the first shiur, and that is Basar b'chalav, because they're both permissible items, it takes a lot to create an isser. I think I mentioned the lashon that I started, it was in the first year, was that it's easier to prevent a marriage than to end a marriage in yeshiva. It's easier to, once you have something that's a problem, it's very hard to get rid of it. Nevela is a problem. Once it's a problem, it's like a pest. It's very hard to get rid of. Basar b'chalav are two permissible items. You want to create an isser by putting in the rennet into the milk. If there's shishim, it's not going to create an isser. That's the rationale. So if you have, just to review, if I have the stomach lining of a cow, and it's meat, kosher cow, kosher rennet, and I put it into cheese, into milk to make cheese, if there's 60 times the milk corresponding to the meat, it's going to be batel. B'diavad, it's going to be okay. But if it's a nevela stomach lining, same thing, a problem. Why? Because nevela is already usser. Once it's already usser, it's not going to be batal b'shishim. The reason being is because batal b'shishim only applies when it's unrecognizable. Over here, it turns into cheese because of the isser. So you can't say it's unrecognizable. But when it comes to basar b'chalav, where both permissible items, the milk is mutter, the meat is mutter, you want to create an isser? You can't create an isser if it's batal b'shishim. That's the basic premise. Okay. Now before we continue, let's just point out a couple points in the shach. I told you that if you have kosher meat, kosher stomach lining, kosher milk, it's batal b'shishim. Technically, the Mechaber doesn't say that. The Mechaber says yesh ba tam asura. What's that? What's that about? Shishim. What's the yesh ba tam? So this is actually a reference to something the Mechaber will address later on. The Mechaber Shita, we don't paskin this way. Ashkenazim don't paskin this way. Even a Sfardim, I don't think paskin this way either. The Mechaber Shita is that you actually don't go shishim. What you do is you offer it to a guy and let the guy taste it. If the guy tastes it and he tastes the Isser, it's a problem. If he doesn't taste the Isser, it's fine. That's the general rule of the Mechaber. So the Mechaber actually never goes with shishim. That's just a general rule. Whenever you have a concept, Ashkenazim go shishim. Sfardim actually, or at least the Mechaber, holds you don't automatically go shishim. What you begin with is you offer it to a guy. So if, let's say, I have a piece of pork that falls into a cholent, Ashkenazim, you just figure out shishim. By Sfardim, the Mechaber actually says you give it to a guy to taste. If he tastes pork, then it's a problem. If he doesn't take pork, it's not a problem. This is for a sugya later on, so that's why the Mechaber doesn't say shishim. He'll never say shishim. He'll just say yesh batam asura, ein batam muteres. Because the Mechaber, in the Mechaber's jargon, it's not shishim or not shishim. It's not shishim or not shishim. It's give it to a guy. So over here, you would offer the guy this wheel of cheese, and you would say, "Do you taste any meat?" And if he says yes, then it's a problem. If he doesn't say then it's not a problem. So the Shach speaks this out in Sifkat and Lamed Daled, just to finish up, and then we'll go for a review. The Shach writes in Sifkat and Lamed Daled, Koloimar, Kishein Begviyah Shishim Neged Or. We paskin that if you have kosher rennet that you put into milk, shishim is all that matters. Now, why doesn't the Mechaber say that? So it says the Shach, V'Mechaber Azl Tameh. The Mechaber is consistent with his view throughout Basar b'chalav and Taruvis, the Sfira Le L'Kamon, because he paskins later on in Reish Siman Sadi Ches, in the beginning of Siman Sadi Ches, Disamchina Natima Savik Kachavim, that you don't go with shishim. You offer it to a guy to taste, and if he tastes it, it's a problem. If he doesn't taste it, it's fine. L'kach Kosav Stam Im Yesh Batam Basar. That's why the Mechaber will never say shishim. He's just going to say, give it to a guy to taste. Aval anon. I'm sorry?
Could be less.
Yeah. According to the Mechaber, it's high risk. High risk, high reward. You give it to a guy to taste, it could be 1 in 30. If he doesn't taste meat, it's going to be fine. Could be 1 in 100. If he tastes meat, it's going to be a problem. According to the Mechaber, you only go with shishim if there's no guy around, or if they both taste the same. Like if I have kosher chicken mixed with non-kosher chicken, can't offer it to taste because they taste the same. That's a situation where you'll have to go with shishim according to the Mechaber. Oh, interesting. Well, no, in this case, yeah. If it's a deraisa, that's an interesting point. I don't know. Well, he's not talking about a deraisa, maybe for a reason. That's an interesting point. Good point. So good point. So it says the Shach, Avalanon, but us Ashkenazim, Kaimalan, we paskin, we don't rely on goyim tasting things anymore. For reasons, as we'll see later on, we hold that either people's palates are not as good as they used to, or we're afraid that goyim will try to lie on purpose to mess us up. B'kitzur, whatever the reason is, we don't go with goyim tasting. We hard and fast rule shishim, and therefore mashakasav harab bagav hilkach loy l'mashar b'shishim. We always go with shishim. Okay, that's why the Ramah himself mentions shishim. Always mentions shishim. Fine. Now, I mentioned in the mechaber that if I take this rennet of a kosher animal, I put it into milk, batal b'shishim. Nevela in milk, it's a problem forever. It's the same stomach lining. It's the same milk ratio. But by kosher, it's going to be fine, batal b'shishim. But by non-kosher, it's going to be a major issue. So I explained the reason, but the Shach speaks it out. The Shach writes in Sefkat Lamed Hey, Hachilak b'zeh. What is the explanation? Kosvu apoiskim, the or kevas kshera. When you're dealing with kosher meat and kosher milk, me'achar shehu muter b'fnei atzmo. The milk is kosher and the meat is kosher. V'les be'isser elamishim chiburoi imagvina. You're trying to create an isser. It's harder to create an isser than to get rid of one. When the stomach lining is a nevela, it's already a problem. Once it's already a problem, very hard to get rid of it. The only way you'll get rid of it is batal b'shishim, but it can't be batal b'shishim because it changed the structure of it. It went from milk to cheese. So how could you say that it's batal b'shishim? Batal b'shishim means that I don't notice the isser anymore. I see it. I see it right there. I see the effects of it. Once you see the effects of it, it's not batal. That's only true when it's already usser. But when you have basar b'chalav, which are two permissible items, and you're trying to create an isser, you can't create an isser when the ratio is 1 to 60. Says the Shach, kol emas de lo yoav taima lav basar b'chalav. As long as it's batal b'shishim, it's not basar b'chalav. Elahai ba'apikoi v'ha ba'apikoi. They're two separate. Aval or nevelu ki yotzebay. But when you're dealing with the stomach lining of a nevela, she'aser me'atzma, it's already aser. Kivan shu maimid. Once it changes the structure of it, anuroyin kilu iser be'en. The iser is right here. Okay. Now, umarshal pasak beperakol abasar Siman kuvav afilu hamed ba'ar kevas nevela batal b'shishim. The marshal actually holds that even by nevela it's batal b'shishim. Vein dvar mechrachim, but his words don't make sense, so we don't follow that. Okay. One last halacha, and then I'll mention a practical shaila, and then we'll review. One last halacha is, so if I'm using a stomach lining of a nevela, that's a problem, and it's not batal b'shishim. Says the Ramah. One quick point. I'm sorry. The mechaber. This is all the Ramah. V'dafka shaloi hayasham maimed acher rak ha'aser avalim hayasham gam kid maimed heter havizev zegorim im ikka shishim neged iser. One last halacha. Let's say I have the milk is a large barrel of milk, and I put in the stomach lining of a nevela. So we said it's a problem. But let's say I don't know the science of it. Let's say you need 10 ounces of stomach lining. I have 5 ounces of nevela stomach lining and 5 ounces of kosher stomach lining. Then it's going to be fine. Why? This is called zev ezegorim, which means when the isser is not able to do it on its own, and you need heter to join in, meaning the isser is the nevela stomach lining, it's not enough. It can't do it on its own. It's too much milk. It won't be able to do it. And I'm using additional heter stomach lining to combine together. That's called zev ezegorim. Zev ezegorim is allowed. I don't mean it's allowed to do it. I mean it's batal b'shishim. So if I have 10,000 gallons of milk, like a crazy amount of milk, I need 10 ounces of stomach lining to do it, and I have 5 ounces of nevela stomach lining and 5 ounces of kosher meat stomach lining, and I put it together and I drop it in, it's going to be batal. I thought nevela is not batal. That's when nevela is on its own. Over here, it's zeh, the nevela, vizeh, and the heter is gorim. They combine together. Anytime the isser cannot do it on its own, and you add some heter along with it, and then the combination does it, it's going to be batal b'shishim. Okay, this is just a rule that you have to sort of put on the side. It's called zev ezegorim. It's an obscure concept. Okay, so just to review, and this will review this halacha, a practical concept. The way to make cheese, historically, one of the most classic ways, like the chashuv cheese in the world, is you take the stomach lining of a cow, rennet, you put it into milk, it makes cheese. Now, we've mentioned, if I were to ask you right now, what's the halacha in that? Like, if let's say there was a test, and the question is like, what's the halacha? So you don't want to just say yes or no, because that's ignorant. So what you would say is, well, if it's a nevela, it's going to be a problem. If it's a kosher stomach lining, it's batal b'shishim. Now let me ask you a question. Does batal b'shishim sound like it's allowed? No. Yeah. Batal b'shishim just means if you did it, you can't do it on purpose. So let me ask you a question. How do they make cheese? So this is the point. So the Oiz V'Hadar does point this out. The Oiz V'Hadar points this out. It's not from the Oiz V'Hadar. It's from Rabbi and the Chassam Sofer. That I just happen to quote these three lines, but you just can listen. Mikol makom ein lahater lahamid l'chachila b'ar keves kshera. You are not allowed to take the stomach lining of a kosher cow and put it into 60 times of milk and say, well, Avi said it's bata b'shishim because that's only b'di'eved. You're not allowed to do this initially. You're not allowed to do this l'chachila. This is just in post facto, like this is after the fact. It's fine. You're not allowed to do this l'chachila. So Rav Kiva and Chassam Sofer all say that it's a problem. So practically, what is the way that you can make cheese? So first of all, obviously soft cheese like cottage cheese and cream cheese, they're not using rennet. But like the hard cheeses, how are you allowed to do this? So Rav Kiva says the heter he thinks of is to dry out the stomach lining from last week. If you dry it out to the point where it's a piece of wood, and then put it in, if it happens to turn it into cheese, I don't know. I mean, usually if it's hard like wood, it's probably not going to. But he says that would be a heter because then it's a combination of the two. A, you have bata b'shishim, and it's a piece of wood, which we spoke about last week. Could be it's no longer stomach lining halachically. The Chassam Sofer doesn't like that because the Chassam Sofer says, then, I mean, if it's dried out to the point where it's a piece of wood, it's probably not going to make it into cheese, and to make it into cheese, it's probably not that dry. So it says the Chassam Sofer, the only thing he could think of is if you take the juices off the stomach lining. So not the actual stomach lining, you just excrete the juices of it, boil it. You could use that as a cheese maker. So it happens to be just practically. I'll tell you this: these recordings don't go anywhere past this. So like the gaiva that I'm going to say, it stays within here, so it's a little less Gehenna for me. One of the few things I've done in my life that I'm actually pretty proud of. When I was younger. Like really young, I was in high school, Beis Medrash. I was high school. I wasn't home, so I don't know. It was in Beis Medrash. I would send out these 2 halachas a day. I had a Gmail account called 2 halachas a Gmail, and I would send out 2 halachas a day for Hashivenu. We did it for like 1,300 days. It wasn't really 1,300 days, so like the last 3 years was repeating. But I still, by the way, to this day, I have that email account, and I still every once in a while would just get like, please sign me up. Like someone is asking. I haven't done it in like 15 years. So I used to send it out, and one of the people that would get them, 2 rabbanim of the people that would get it, it was like 700 people. 2 of the people that would get it was Rabbi Genak. Rabbi Genak would get it, which is always fun because he would comment sometimes, be like, Soloveitchik to this, whatever. It's a big Talmid Chacham. And Rabbi Grossman. Rabbi Grossman from the OU, Oleh Shalom. He was a Chashav Yid. So they called me in once for like an interview. I, to this day, don't really know what the interview was for. They wanted to offer me some sort of job or something. But when I got there, and I had to go to the city, which you guys can probably imagine was an ordeal for me. When I got in there, they're like, do you want the job? I said, well, what's the job? And they're like, come back if you're interested. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. And I left. It was literally like that. It was as, Seinfeldian as that. But one of the things that they said in the meeting was they have an OU halacha email. There's a halacha yomis. I get it every day. I don't know if they still do. I think they still do it. They said that my email was their inspiration. So it's one of the few. I was like, okay, so I get some schar for that. So I looked it up because I remember. So the OU halacha email. I didn't have to say any of this just for this next part, but wanted to. Anyway, so the OU halacha yomis had this, and I put it over here. Can you make cheese using animal rennet from a kosher slaughtered animal, or is this an issue of mixing milk and meat? And now I feel like we'll appreciate the email response much more. So they say there are 2 types of kosher animal rennet. One can get kosher rennet from the digested milk that is found in the stomach of a calf, which is last week's halacha. You can take the curdled milk. So that's an easy way to make cheese halachically. First of all, if it's curdled, it's pariv, no problem. If it's a liquid, according to the Ramah, it's milk. Take it out before you salt it with the animal, or take it out within 24 hours. You don't have the problems that we spoke about last week. So they write, this type of rennet is kosher and dairy if it has already solidified its pariv, karush, salul, following the Ramah. This is because the digested and solidified milk found in the calf's stomach is no longer viewed as milk. This type of rennet may be used to make cheese, no problem. There is another type of rennet that can be made from the lining of the stomach of the calf. That's today's halacha. This type of rennet is actual meat and cannot be used to make cheese. L'chachila cannot. However, if a Jew accidentally used such rennet from a kosher slaughtered animal to make cheese, the cheese would be permitted since the amount of meat rennet that is used is much less than 1 part in 60. Apparently every single time it's bata b'shishim, so b'diavad it would be okay. Poskim discuss whether meat rennet can be used if the stomach is dried out to the point where it becomes hard like wood. Rav Kiva Eger says you could. They write, the Chassam Sofer writes that we are no longer experts in how to properly dry out the stomach, and therefore he writes that one should not directly add dried meat rennet to milk. Instead, one should extract the rennet enzymes from the meat by soaking in alcohol and should be added to the milk in combination with other coagulants. That is practically how they do it, but you also now understand why having a hechsher on cheese is so significant, because there are problems potentially. That is the practical about how to make cheese. Okay, let's quickly, because it's already 9:20, we'll quickly review the last 4 seifim. It's not that long, most of the stuff that we've been talking about, so I'm going to run through it probably too quickly. And then I have some tests and do it on your own. Okay, just to review from Sif Hey to Sif Yud Aleph. So Sif Hey was dealing with eggs found in a stomach in the womb of a chicken. Can I take those eggs and cook them with milk? Right? When it comes out of the animal, eggs are eggs, you can cook them with milk. The question is, you cut open the chicken, you find eggs in there. So the sheet of the mechaber is like this. If it's just the yolk is the first thing that develops. If it's just the yolk, that's a problem. If it's the white part and the yolk, even if it's still connected by sinews, then it's fine. So chelmoin and chelboin, even if it's still me'ura begidin, even if it's still connected by sinews, by some sort of umbilical cord, that's fine. That's the sheet of the mechaber. That's the main, most important sheet to remember. The shach happens to be as machmer. The shach holds that you need the white, you need the yolk, you need the soft shell, and you need a hard shell. That's what you need. You need all of it inside the stomach of a cow, l'chachila. That's the sheet of the shach. B'diavad, as long as you have, b'diavad, according to the shach, if you have the two, the white and the yellow, and it's not connected by sinews, then it's fine b'diavad. And in hefsed meruba, it's all going to be fine. That's the sheet of the shach. The Taz brings a minig not to do this at all. The Taz says there's a minig by women that if you find any egg in the stomach of a chicken, do not cook it with milk. I don't care, it could be at every stage under the sun. Don't do it. That's the minig brought down by the Taz. Okay, you can just keep running through. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. Sif Vav is a very long mechaber and ramah, but basically in the mechaber and ramah we're mentioning many isurim derabanan, basar b'chalav derabanan. Such derabanan that you're not allowed to eat, you're not allowed to do it. These are all the lists of derabanans. The following: smoking milk and meat together is derabanan. Cooking in a natural geyser, chami Tiveria, the hot springs of Tiveria, is derabanan. Meaning you're not allowed to do it derabanan. If you eat it, it's over and it's a derabanan. Cooking in mei chalav is derabanan. What's mei chalav? So we'll see in a moment. Mei chalav is where you take cheese, you remove the cheese, so you have this milky, watery, milky way. You then take that water, boil it, remove the curds, the water. So it's the cheese, boiled that concoction, remove the schmutz on top, that water is derabanan. Okay? That's also derabanan. Chalav mesa, the milk of a dead cow, meaning you take milk out of a dead cow, it's also derabanan. Chalav from a male animal is also derabanan. And blood and meat is derabanan. So if you take meat and cook blood in it, it's a derabanan mixture of basar b'chalav. We also mentioned agav. This is completely agav. One would argue maybe extra credit. I don't remember. I actually don't remember what I wrote. No, I probably don't remember. But anyway, the Rambam Shita is that if you have blood and milk and you cook it together, blood and milk. I'm sorry, I said blood and basar v'dam. That dam and chalav. I'm sorry, blood and milk. If you cook blood and milk together, hold on a second. I just want to confirm now. No, I don't remember. The mechaber says, hold on, sorry. Chalav zachar. Dam b'chalav. I'm sorry, dam b'chalav. Blood and milk. So that's derabanan. So the Rambam writes that if you drink it, it'll be basar b'chalav derabanan, but it's still blood, which is an issa deraisa. The shach then disagrees because the shach says we paskin that when you cook blood, it's now a derabanan. So it's a double derabanan. That's the shita of the mechaber. Then the Ramah pointed out, but the milk of a male person is nothing. That's not milk at all. That's not halachically milk. Then the Ramah said 3 halachas, which he calls a chumrah. He says don't do these 3 things, although he acknowledges each one there's makom to question. Halacha number one is if you have a non-Jewish maid who's cooking in a pot of food, unclear what's in the pot, but she's cooking something, some sort of dish in a pot of food, you want to raise the intensity of the fire, not because you want to cook the food, but because it's cold and you want to raise the intensity of the fire. Don't do that. Why? Because it's possible she's cooking in the pot basar b'chalav, or she cooked in the pot basar b'chalav an hour ago, and now it's coming out of the walls of the pot, and you're aiding and abetting in the process of cooking. Says the Ramah, don't do this. Now we mentioned that's a bit of a chiddush. I'll tell you why. Because it's eino mechaven, right? It's unintentional. Is it inevitable? And this is what we called a suffix psikresha. It might be inevitable, might not be inevitable. The Ramah obviously feels that that's an issue. We mentioned that the Taz disagrees. The Taz holds by Hilchos Shabbos that a suffix psikresha, something that may be inevitable, may not be inevitable, is actually permitted. We said the case was the fly and hammering up the fly with a box. You're hammering up a box on Shabbos, and your intention is just to lock up the box. There might be flies inside. Is it inevitable? Not sure, because there's information I'm missing. That's called suffix psikresha. The Ramah says not to do it, but he acknowledges it is a chumrah. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two is that if you take a dish, dirty meat dish, it's got schmutz, meat schmutz, rinse it off in a pot of water. Dirty milk dish with piece of cheese, rinse it off in the same pot of water. Don't serve that pot to your cow to drink, because it's basar b'chalav and they're going to drink basar b'chalav. You can't asr b'hana. Okay. The Rambam says don't do this. The Shach says this is talking about hot water. So he said it's a peller of kivega esakasha. I don't understand. If it's hot water, how are you allowed to do it together? If you forget about, right? You're taking hot water with meat, cooking it, basically. You're taking hot cheese. Again, you have a dirty meat dish, a dirty cheese dish. You're washing them both in hot water. So you know what you're doing? It's basar b'chalav bishul, basar b'chalav deraisa. How are you allowed to do this? And why is the Ramah calling it a chumrah? So therefore, says the Kivega, no, we're talking about cold water. And because it's cold water, it's just a chumrah. Again, this is just to review what we've done over the last 3 weeks. One more halacha in this sif, and that is they would take a bowl and use it for shampoo. And the shampoo was they would take the ashes under the pots. They would take the ashes by the stovetop and put it in the water, and they would wash their hairs with the ashes. So says the Ramah, don't use that dish anymore. After you take out the ashes, don't use that dish. Why? Because the ashes are under the pot where you spill out meat, and then you spill milk, so the ashes are basar b'chalav. So that pot, that's hot water that you're washing your hair in, is basar b'chalav. Don't use the pot anymore. So the berheit of esakasha, how are you using the pot how are you washing your hair with it? It's basar b'chalav. Don't use the pot. I don't understand. So we mentioned that it's probably a chumrah because when it's burning into ash, it's already no longer food. So this is just a chumrah ba'alma. Because by the time it gets to the milk and by the time it gets to the meat, it's ashes is not achila, it's nothing. It's not oichel anymore, so it's a chumrah ba'alma. Okay, that was Sif Vav. Sif Zayin was that cooking a fetus in milk is basar b'chalav deraisa, but cooking a placenta is only derabanan. Also the hooves and the horns and the skin of an animal is all derabanan. Cooking it in milk is all derabanan. Sif Ches was what I mentioned, the meichalav, that the definition of meichalav derabanan is, again, you take the cheese, you have the milky water, you boil that milky water, because if you take that milky water, that's basar b'chalav deraisa. You boil that milky water, remove the curds, that following water is only derabanan. That was Sif Ches. Sif Tes is what, now Sif Tes, Sif Yud, and Sif Yud Aleph is what we've talked about the last week and today. Sif Tes is that what is the status of the milk that's found in the stomach lining of the cow? Is it considered milk or is it not considered milk? Can I cook it in meat? So the mechaber shita is it's not milk. Whether it's liquid, whether it's solidified, it's parav. The Ramah was the one who said if it's liquid, it's considered milk. Don't cook it with meat. If it's solidified, it's not milk. That's the shita of the Ramah. And Sif Yud was the next step. I have that liquid, and then I let it sit in the stomach lining of the cow for 24 hours. Is it a problem? So it's very much totally in that. If it's considered milk, like the Ramah, why the liquids is milk, so if you have the milk that's sitting in the stomach lining for 24 hours, after 24 hours it's as if you cook together, so it's in essence, I took milk, cooked it in meat, that liquid is now basar b'chalav. If you were to then use it to make cheese, it's a problem of basar b'chalav. However, if it's solidified, so then it's considered waste, it's considered parav, but not just parav, it's perpetually parav. Even if you then were to let it sit in the stomach lining of the cow for 24 hours, so it's cooking with meat, it's so gross that any meat flavor, it kills. It's forever parav. And if you were to use it to make cheese, b'diavad it's going to be fine. You would not need shishim. That's the sheet of the Ramah, and the Mechaber obviously feels that way because he holds that it's never dairy, it's always parav. And now today's halacha was in Sif Yud Aleph, and that is using. One more halacha was that you're allowed to take the stomach lining of a cow, let it dry out to the point where it's a piece of wood, and use it as a canteen for milk. We talked about as an extension of that, potentially there was a heter, the Tiferes Tzvi. The Tiferes Tzvi said that you could take mezcal tequila, which is they take tequila and they have worms that they dry out to the point where they're inedible, and then they put it into the tequila either for looks, for a coloring, whatever it is. So the Tiferes Tzvi was makel because he takes this concept that when you dry something out, it becomes mamish, it loses its essence, and he extended it from the stomach lining even to worms, but we said it's not so pashut. Many places can disagree, and the star K is machmer. And one last halacha, and that's today, and that is if you then take the stomach lining of a cow and use it to make cheese, so what's the halacha? So the halacha is very simple. If it's from a kosher stomach lining, so then if the milk is 60 times the stomach lining, it's going to be fine. If it's from a nevela, it's a problem. Afilu be'elef, it's always a problem because it's davar ha'maimid, because it's not batal b'shishim, because I can say batal b'shishim when the molecular structure is changed. It's very, very much recognizable. Okay, that is everything. And then just give it 1 minute, and then happy to take questions. And then I have the test. I'm sorry.
The previous halacha just said with regard to it becoming hard like wood, so there's no issue. Because you didn't mention last week about rehydration.
So there are shittas that hold that if you rehydrate it is an issue. Right. There was shittas, but the Tiferes Tzvi disagrees. It's a machlekes Tiferes Tzvi and the Noid B'Yehuda. We mentioned that last week.
What's the case that you had of? It was a case that had a nevela, partial nevela, 50% nevela, 50% from a
today.
Right.
Yeah. So you had.
How is that even possible? If we just said that it's not bottled the element.
Oh, so we're talking about a ratio. So we're talking about a situation where you need a certain amount of rennet to make it into cheese. It's so much milk that you need, let's say, 10 ounces. And it's 5 ounces of the nevela. So the nevela on its own cannot turn this into cheese. It's too much milk. And it's only able to turn into cheese because it's combining with kosher stomach lining. So it's kosher and non-kosher stomach lining, but you need them together. So it's not considered just nevela. You're right, if the nevela on its own can do it, adding kosher stomach lining is not going to make a difference. But as I specifically said, it's where the stomach lining of the nevela cannot do it on its own. The ratio, it does not work. Okay, that was a very, very quick Hazara. All right, let me just pause this for 1 second.